Good afternoon, Gideon Falter. How are you doing?
Good afternoon, Yoni, and huge mazal tov on the latest addition to your family.
Thank you so much, Gideon. Thank you very much. Ladies and gentlemen, today my guest is Gideon Falter, who is the Chief Executive of Campaign Against Antisemitism, which is a volunteer-led charity that is dedicated to exposing antisemitism through education and through zero-tolerance enforcement of the law. Gideon is a dear friend and a member of St. John's Synagogue and somebody who's done so much for the Jewish community. Gideon studied British, French and European law at Warwick University and became very heavily involved in various Jewish causes. And since the summer of 2014, Gideon has been leading Campaign Against Antisemitism. Gideon, tell us first of all how you're doing and tell us a little bit about your work.
Well, we're still working as normal at the moment, despite these very abnormal times. Sadly, we've had a number of volunteers have been quite severely affected by the virus, and some have tragically lost dear family members. And other than that, though, we've got a phenomenal team who are, despite all of the hardship, still managing to do the work that we do. Anti-Semitism has obviously shifted online to a significant degree. We're still finding some incidents happening in the streets, but the more that people have been confined, the more that anti-Semites seem to have gone online and sought to pursue Jews there instead.
Yeah, it's been particularly upsetting hearing in the news about the various Zoom anti-Semitisms, even on days like Yom HaShoah, things like this going on. I mean, can you share us with some reflection on this and how you're combating these terrible anti-Semites who are doing these things?
So anti-Semites, unfortunately, are extremely persistent generally in their beliefs, particularly those who are driven by a form of anti-Semitic ideology which puts Jews at the center of the world's problems. And so they absolutely obsessively pursue Jews. And we've really seen some terrible examples of this, because the fact that everything now in the Jewish community, which is so used to meeting and being together, has had to move online. We've now seen anti-Semites who have also pursued us online and have started to invade things like shivas, funerals, Yom HaShoah commemorations. So these are people who are absolutely shameless. They're absolutely intent on causing the maximum harm and upset possible. And what we've been working to do is to try to identify these people. And we will be able to speak, hopefully in a few weeks, about some of the legal efforts that we've been making as well, because we've actually just made a significant stride legally in being able to unmask some of the online trolls who stay hidden so effectively.
It's very worrying, it's very upsetting, and you know, anti-Semitism isn't a new thing, as you know only too well. It's a term that was described in the 19th, it was coined in the 19th century, but we've seen it throughout our history, pogroms and blood libels, and of course the Shoah, the Holocaust, and even nowadays in the 21st century, it's quite worrying. But you know, I've got a challenging question I want to ask you, because anti-Semitism and perhaps assimilation, it's almost like a paradox of Jewish survival. You know, we see across the Jewish world rising numbers in assimilation, when non-Jews love us so much they want to marry us. And we see across the Jewish world rising numbers in anti-Semitism, when non-Jews hate us so much they want to kill us. And some argue, in a strange way, anti-Semitism has always been the factor that's ensured Jewish survival. And in a way, without anti-Semitism, in times of prosperity and peace, Jews lose their identity. And it's a challenging, almost controversial question. But I wondered if you've ever thought about this or have any reflections on this.
I think there's some overlap between the two, because certainly if people hate Jews so much, for example, that they just don't want Jews around them, then there's no chance to assimilate. But I think that really Jewish identity stems from something else. It stems from something internal, not something external. And I think that the times when Jews have lost their sense of identity and lost their sense of self, I think that that's generally more to do with the Jewish communities and the way that they teach their children, the way that they imbue these Jewish values in their offspring and the next generation. When that's at fault and when that struggles, then I think that's when Jewish communities start to lose their sense of Jewishness, and we start to see people not really assimilating so much, but just really forsaking their Jewishness. I think that assimilation is often just when people decide that actually their Jewishness isn't that important to them, and that therefore they can dispense with it. And I think that is more at issue. I think sometimes when there are these cases of anti-Semitism, for example, as we've seen over the last few years with anti-Semitism in the Labour Party, it does cause Jews to rally together, and there are some positive effects of that. But I think more so, if you look over the last few years, what has happened, I think it's made a lot of Jews, according to our polling at least, it's made a lot of Jews, about 40% of Jews in our last polling, feel afraid to show their Jewishness in public. And so rather than anti-Semitism sort of making people prouder, bolder, more together as a Jewish community, I think what it does is it gives the appearance sometimes of the Jewish community being more together, rallying together. But in reality, what it does is it causes people to feel fearful about expressing their Judaism. Their children will catch on to that. Their children might start to associate Judaism with negativity. And I think that really anti-Semitism generally never has any benefits at all. It's just something which Jews have had to face over the years, and I think that assimilation is also something that Jews have to face over the years. But it's a separate issue. It's not really interlinked that much with anti-Semitism.
It's an interesting thing. You know, I often have, as you say, I have students at the JFS and from the synagogue who've expressed to me their fears and their concerns to show their identity in public, whether that be on university campuses or in the workplace. And it's a challenge. I know that the story of a friend of my brother who was invited for a job interview, and he decided not to wear his kippah. He didn't want to wear his kippah for the interview, even though he was an Orthodox and observant Jew. And throughout the course of the interview, this person interviewing him asked him, I've read your CV, and you described the way in which you're an Orthodox Jew, you spent time in Israel studying in yeshiva. May I ask, why are you not wearing a kippah? And he kind of was a bit taken aback what to respond, and he didn't get the job. And in his feedback, he was told by the person interviewing him, if you're not proud of who you are and what you believe in, then how are you going to be proud for me and for my company and what we believe in? So it's an interesting question, and it's a challenging balance. Now, I can see in the background, you are somebody who is very passionate. You've got Tzedek Tirzov in your backdrop, which is the famous posuk from the Torah. We need to pursue justice. And you are somebody who is somewhat of a Jewish hero, as you were described by the Simon Wiesenthal Center. You've done incredible stuff. I don't know if you could share with us a little bit about what you've been involved with, particularly with the terrible anti-Semitism we've seen in the last few years with the Labour Party. I'm sure our listeners would be interested to hear about that.
I mean, when anti-Semitism first reared its head within the Labour Party, we actually really had no idea who Jeremy Corbyn even was. The first I knew of it was when volunteers, and we've got a lot of volunteers in very specific teams. We had volunteers in a team called the Political and Government Investigations Unit, and they came to talk to me in 2015 about Jeremy Corbyn. They said, we must have a talk about Jeremy Corbyn. And I said, well, who's Jeremy Corbyn? And obviously we very quickly learned who he was. But what we've seen in the Labour Party is a party which was once fiercely anti-racist, which has been behind many of the reforms in this country and legislative drives to make Britain one of the countries with the best legislative frameworks in the world for fighting racism. And we've seen that party completely turned on its head, so that the anti-racists have become really a minority in their party, trying to speak out against the leadership which became institutionally racist, which my belief is that Jeremy Corbyn himself was and is an anti-Semite. And to see all of that happen, really in the blink of an eye, we saw at Campaign Against Antisemitism a lot of people joining us who were lifelong Labour members. And they felt that they had to do something against their own, to try and investigate and expose their own party. And so there have been a lot of very difficult aspects of what we've seen. But I think the most important thing has been to say, look, tzedek tzedek tirdov is, you know, it's a Jewish value to seek justice. And when we seek justice, we must ensure that we don't try to minimize the sanction. We need to make sure that if somebody has done something against us, if somebody has committed an act of anti-Semitism, they need to be held to account for it. They need to be punished for it. And if the people responsible for doing the punishing, the political party leadership in this case, decide that they're not going to do something about it, we need to hold them to account. And if the political party leader has done things which are anti-Semitic, as Jeremy Corbyn did, then we need to hold them to account as well. And I think there have been moments when our community sometimes has struggled with the idea that even a political party leader needs to be held to the same standards as everybody else. And we've always been very clear on that. And I think it's something which you know, thankfully our community came together. We all recognized what needed to be done. And I think it's something which hopefully will bear us in good stead in the future. I think it's very important that not just with the Labour Party, but with all political parties, we don't get back into the habit of saying, well, things are slightly better now, we don't need to worry so much, and we sort of let our guard down. If we see anti-Semitism, we need to act against it, and we need to make sure that there is zero tolerance, because when we start allowing it through the gaps, that's precisely when we put ourselves in danger.
Absolutely. You know, they say something that starts with the Jews doesn't ever end with the Jews. And this is something really important for wider society and for democracy and freedom. We're so grateful to you for what you've done. You know, you've spoken in St. John's Wood. People couldn't get in the room. When you spoke on Shabbat some months ago, it was incredible. And I remember our dear friend Russell Areha, Alav Shalom, who was a big supporter of what you did. And we miss him terribly, but we are so grateful for him for bringing you to our community and getting you involved more with shul life and with community life. Perhaps you could reflect how you got involved with social action. You know, there are a lot of young people who are going to be watching this who perhaps they feel they'd like to get more involved. Now's the time in their life, they've been furloughed, they'd love to get involved with volunteering. And how did you have that energy to do that? And what advice would you share with young people?
You know, before I answered that, just to mention Russell, who is very, very greatly missed still. You know, when Russell passed away, it was a horrific shock to all of us in the community. And when writing his one of the shivas, I gave a eulogy, and when writing it, I went back through our messages, and I saw that as soon as I'd met Russell, I'd only known Russell a few months, and we went from not knowing each other at all to speaking every day, often several times a day. And one of the first messages he sent me was about how he had seen what we were doing. He decided that he wanted to get involved, that he was getting involved fulsomely. And then I see all sorts of messages where he's introducing me to people, where he's finding ways that he can help. And really, Russell was the perfect example of how when you see something that means something to you, you should do something about it. And the enormous impact that each one of us can have if we put our minds to something. You know, when I got involved with this myself in 2014, I did not expect to be doing anything other than what I was doing at the time, which was making a living, living my life, and not worrying so much about anti-Semitism. And I could see that things were getting worse and worse. And during the 2014 Gaza war, you know, we had people marching down the streets with signs saying things like, "Save Gaza, Hitler, you were right," and the police doing nothing about it. And I thought somebody needs to act against that, because these people will just get bolder and bolder and bolder. And by getting involved myself, by volunteering, by finding other people who wanted to volunteer and working together, we've built something which my feeling is that we've been able to do something which none of us imagined we could do back when we set out in 2014. We didn't imagine the scale of the problems that we would come up against. We didn't expect people like Jeremy Corbyn to enter the mix. but we certainly didn't expect to be able to have the kind of impact that we've had, not just on anti-Semitism in politics, but also anti-Semitic crime, for example. So I think that if people in the community feel that there is something that they feel strongly about, there is no time like now. Hopefully there will never be another time like it in our lives. Hopefully this is the one and only pandemic that we will experience in our lives where we have to take these kinds of measures. So take this time. These are very tough times for a lot of people. A lot of people have suffered terrible loss. But if you've got extra time on your hands, as a lot of people do, think about what you're passionate about. It doesn't have to be anti-Semitism, although we would be very happy to have you as a volunteer, but think about what you're passionate about. Find an organization or form an organization which can tackle that problem and devote yourself to it. I can guarantee you it will be one of the most rewarding things you do in your life.
Amazing, amazing. Well, Gideon, this has been an absolute pleasure. And I look forward to seeing you soon. I'm sure we can't wait to that moment. We're back in the Kiddush in St. John's Wood having a l'chaim. And please,
I'm missing everybody. I'm missing Kiddush particularly.
And being as one of the most eligible members of bachelors in our community, I'm sure everybody looks forward to seeing you too as well. So we wish you well and stay healthy and stay safe. And thanks so much for this opportunity.
Thank you, and Mazal Tov again.
Thank you. Thank you.